Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to continue. We've been studying the book of Romans, and last week we did Romans chapter 5. And the previous weeks we've kind of had a theme. We did original sin a few weeks ago, and then Romans chapter 5 kind of built on that because it's a chapter that a lot of people use to support original sin. And we saw that that concept isn't completely biblical, not the full idea of it. We do inherit a fallen nature, but this nature is not in itself a sin. Sin is the transgression of the law, not bad equipment. So, but I wanted to clarify some things on the nature that we have, that nature that we inherit. And so our topic today is going to be two natures. So it's not necessarily a chapter of Romans, it's just kind of more of a topical study. So we're going to look at, and we're going to compare the flesh versus the spirit. Two natures. Okay? And we're going to have some verses on either one, both of them, and we'll see how they describe these things. So, first one we're going to look at is First John chapter 2, verse 16. And as we read through these, I want you guys to help me out. We're going to write some things on how this describes. This one's on the flesh side, so we want to see how this one describes the flesh that we are born with, that every single one of us inherits as soon as we are born. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16.
For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world.
Okay, so what do you think? What does this say about the flesh that we have? Any words jump out at you?
Lust.
Ideas? Lust?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the word lust jumps out. Now, it's important to know that the word lust there, in Greek, that original, when we use the English word lust, it has a negative connotation, right? But the Greek word there could mean good or bad. Do you remember when Jesus said at the Last Supper, he said, with great desire I've longed to have this supper with you, right? Mm-hmm. Same Greek word. This is any desire. It could be a good desire or a bad desire. But this is talking specifically about the desires or lusts of the flesh. And how are they described? What do you think? Is it a good thing or a bad thing, according to that verse?
It's not of the Father.
So you're saying bad because it's not of the Father?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right.
Not of the Father. And if it's not of the Father, it's automatically, that would make it
Negative.
bad desires or negative. Absolutely. So that is the flesh itself. Our equipment, the bodies that we have desires that are not of the Father. There's good and bad desires, but your body just wants all of them. And it's your mind and the Spirit's job to say, no, these ones are good, these ones are bad, these ones we can fulfill, these ones we say no to. But the flesh just wants them, I use the analogy of when you're hungry at lunchtime, and you have your lunch, and then your coworker has his lunch, your stomach doesn't know the difference. Your stomach wants both of them. Right? it just wants food. It has no idea. It just wants everything. Right? And if you let your stomach and your flesh just take over, you'd be taking everyone else's food, and it would not be good. Right? But that's why it's the lust of the flesh. They just want everything they want. Your mind, controlled by the Spirit, is supposed to conquer and direct it. Okay. So there's one example, and this is the flesh that we all have, that we inherit, has lusts that are not of the Father. Next one, James chapter 1, verse 14. James 1:14.
It says, but each one is tempted when he's drawn away by his own desires and enticed.
So what does that tell you?
Everybody was tempted.
Everybody's tempted. Okay.
You see, you're tempted when you're drawn away by your own desire.
So drawn by your
So
own
it says,
desires.
yeah, it says enticed. So
Enticed,
like you're lured in. To the,
drawn, enticed. Use the word lured. It's probably a good one. By what?
by desires.
By whose desires?
Our desires.
Our
Right.
desire.
And this is, of course, speaking of our own fallen nature, our own flesh, your own desires. So, again, we have a description of what the flesh does. It entices you, pulls you, tempts you. Okay? Is that pretty clear? All right. Galatians chapter 5, verse 17. The next one.
But the desires can be different for different people.
Yeah, that's a good point. The different people are tempted by different things. We were talking about that last night. My wife has never had a hamburger. So when we're driving on the highway and you see those big giant billboards for Carl's Jr. or something, not tempting for her, right? But for other people, oh, you know,
I
it's
can't believe you didn't have a hamburger. in
your
your
mouth
life.
starts watering, huh?
So you've never had a hamburger in your life?
I know,
Wow.
we're in America, right? Vegetarian. And
Really?
certain things are tempting to certain people, but they're not tempting to others, you know?
He, by the way, when I met him, was working In-N-Out Burger and eating
Yes.
them every day.
I was eating hamburgers all the time. Now they don't interest me as much. So yeah, we're all tempted by different things, but the category of these temptations being not of the Father is the same, even though the specific temptations might be different. Okay, Galatians 5:17. Now I'm going to put this one on both sides. Galatians 5:17. As you'll see, it has something to say about the Spirit as well. Can somebody read that one for us?
For the flesh has lusted against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would.
Okay, what do you think about that?
So, the flesh is against the spirit.
It is against the Spirit. That's pretty clearly bad, right?
Yeah, and then actually they are vice versa. The spirit against the flesh, and the flesh is against the spirit.
Vice versa. They are contrary. It's how could you describe that?
Opposite.
Opposite. What else? Enmity. Enmity.
Against.
There's a conflict between these two.
Against. Conflict. Like a war, right?
Mhm.
They are fighting against each other, the flesh versus the spirit. And we're all born with this. All these pulls towards sin, this warring against, that's in our nature as soon as we're born. Right? We all inherit that. Okay. So it goes against the spirit, but then what does the spirit do?
Spirit goes against the flesh.
The spirit fights back, right? Hello.
And has the
And so we also have war on this side. And opposite,
conflict.
conflict and all that. Okay, so they're fighting each other. The spirit against the flesh. And the flesh against the spirit. Fighting back and forth. It's not a one-way battle, by the way. Isn't that interesting? It's not just the flesh fighting against the spirit, it's also the spirit fighting against the flesh. Okay, next one. This will go on both sides as well. Matthew 26:41. Matthew 26:41. Okay. Lines here. See if we can fit all these. Matthew 26:41. I'd like to read that for us.
Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Ah, so how does this describe the two natures?
The flesh is weak.
Flesh is weak. Now, by weak, what does it mean? Because you could also, depending on the context, you could describe this flesh as being quite strong, right? Even so much that in Romans 7, Paul says, I can't even conquer it. It does whatever it wants.
I think it's weak against temptation.
It's weak against temptation.
Yeah, that's what it says in the verse.
That's the idea. It's weak when it comes to doing the right thing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Weak to do right. Okay. And how's the Spirit described?
Willing.
And willing, of course, we have to qualify that. Willing to do what?
To do what is right.
To do what is right. So the Spirit wants to do the right thing. Flesh is weak. It's not really interested in doing the right thing. Okay? So you see the contrast. All right, Jeremiah 17 and verse 9. Jeremiah 17, 9.
The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?
Okay. How does this describe? It uses the word heart there. The Bible uses different words to describe it, and you all know that in the Bible, heart
Means the mind.
means the mind.
Mm-hmm.
There's a rule in American society when we say heart, we're thinking emotions,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's not how the Hebrew writers described it. It's everything is a step down. So we think the head, but they say the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And they're talking about this. So when Jesus says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So the word there, it just means your inner being, kind of. And then when instead of heart to describe emotions, what body part does it use to describe emotions? Do you guys remember? One step down.
Is the stomach.
The bowels. Isn't that interesting?
The
Yeah.
veins.
Yeah. I wonder if there's some scientific, I'm sure there's some doctors who could describe
There is.
some connections between the
That's the
bowels and the
ceramic
emotions.
There are
There's-
some
there's a
research
connection.
about that.
Yeah.
Your gut can affect your brain.
So your bowels is how the Bible describes emotion, but the heart is how the Bible describes what you're thinking. So
The
anyway,
heart and mind are together.
same thing in the Bible. Yeah. And we kind of get this idea of the heart versus the mind, but in the Bible, the heart and the mind's the same thing. Okay. So they're together. Okay. So that's just a kind of side note. So the heart or the mind, which is obviously the unconverted mind, is what? How is it described?
Deceitful.
Deceitful.
Deceitful. What else?
The wicked.
Wicked. Deceitful and wicked. All right. And that's another part of your fallen nature that you are born with. Everyone has that bad equipment. Okay. And the last one on the flesh side we'll look at is 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14. Or would like to read that one for us?
But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, nor can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned.
What do you think?
Natural men receive it.
So here it's described as the natural man. Obviously, this is the nature that we're born with, a natural man, which is the flesh. And how is it described?
Not seeing the spirit of God.
Not seeing the Spirit? What do you think?
Not receiving.
Not receiving.
Not receiving. Not receiving what?
The Spirit of God.
The Spirit or, what is it? How is it worded there?
Not receive the Spirit is, who is from God, that, wait,
2:14.
They don't see the spirit of God because they are what they thought are foolishness.
they don't receive the things of the Spirit of God.
Yeah, that's how it's worded.
So like, the teachings,
And does it say anything more in that verse, or does it stop there?
But the natural man does not receive the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, nor can he know them, because they are spiritually discerned.
Because they are spiritually discerned. So the things of the Spirit of God
Are discerned.
are spiritually discerned, and the natural man doesn't receive them. Okay? Okay, so it does not receive spiritual things. And can't discern them.
Not only that, they think it's foolish or dumb.
Ah, I
Mhm.
think it's spiritual things are foolish, dumb. Good. All right, we have a pretty good description. Now, this whole side, this whole nature, this is not optional if you're a human. This is mandatory. You're born with this whole side. Now, there's different levels of how much you participate in all these things. You can, by the Spirit, overcome and put to death the flesh, but you're born with this nature. And even after conversion, it's still there. This nature, having the desires that are not of the Father, your own flesh tempting you, your own flesh going against the Spirit, and your own flesh saying, hey, these are Bible things are dumb. All these things are going to remain with you, and you're born with all this. This is mandatory. This side is there, but there's aspects of it that are optional. You don't have to participate in this. You can reject the Spirit, can you not? Yeah. You can reject the Spirit. Okay, but we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves. Let's see the descriptions of the Spirit. Okay. Acts chapter 9 and verse 5. Now this one is kind of a pre-conversion. This is Jesus speaking to Saul, who will become Paul, on the road to Damascus. And he says something very interesting. Let me read that for us. It's before Paul was converted.
Verse 5 says, and he said, who are you, Lord? Then the Lord said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads.
Interesting. That's an interesting word. Does anyone have a different word? Kick against something? Pricks? Kick against the pricks. Interesting. The idea, does anyone have any idea what this means? The pricks? Kick against the pricks? He says it's hard for you to kick against the pricks.
This is stick used to guide the oxen,
Ah.
To guide, like the cows, and sometimes when they go one way, you kick them, you hit them one side so they can go the other direction.
Ah.
So basically, he was kicking against the guidance or against the direction from God.
From God.
Yeah, from God.
Absolutely. Have you ever heard the phrase, something pricked your conscience? You ever heard that? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the Spirit was speaking to Paul and telling him what he was doing was wrong, and he was fighting it, like you're describing cattle going against the guidance of being poked. Hey, go this direction, and Paul was fighting. So Paul was kicking against the pricks. So
I think that started at the death of Stephen.
I bet, yeah, he probably knew that was wrong in his heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a very simple word we can use to describe this whole thing, right? Conviction. The Spirit convicts. Now he especially does that. The Spirit especially does that before you're converted. Like in this case with Paul, he was fighting the conviction. But the Spirit continues to convict you after you're converted. Absolutely, right? If you're doing something, so he tries to, like the cattle, poke you back in the right direction. That's a good analogy. Is that what the word? Have you looked up the origin of the word? Has that meaning? Interesting. Okay, so Acts chapter 7, verse 51 is another one. Acts 7:51. So I'm going to read that one for us. Now this is Stephen speaking, giving his great sermon before he's stoned, and he kind of concludes it with a rounding rebuke. So will you read that for us, please?
You stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, Ye do always resist the Holy Ghost, as your fathers did, so do ye.
So the people that Stephen's talking to, who are about to stone him, they were doing what?
Resisting the Holy Spirit.
They were resisting the Holy Spirit.
Divine impulse.
Oh, you have the definition of the previous word.
Yeah, the pregnant is kentron, which means a point, a sting, figuratively divine impulse.
Divine impulse. Yeah, absolutely. Conviction.
Firepower.
He was fighting it. So in this one, they're also, it's the same idea, right? They're resisting the Holy Spirit. So again, this is the idea that the Spirit convicts, but
Okay. I also have
men can do what?
Resist it.
They can resist it.
That one has the,
Now this is a very strong verse for free will. Because there are, again, I hate to always bag on our Calvinist friends, but our Calvinist brethren will tell us that you have irresistible grace. Have you ever heard that? You guys heard of the tulip, the 5 points of Calvinism? The I is for irresistible grace, but here we have,
Resist.
they were resisting the Spirit. So is it resistible or irresistible?
It's
It's
resistible.
resistible, absolutely. They rejected it, they resisted it. Which means that God gave them free will to do so, because if He wanted to, He could force them. But
That could
apparently,
be irresistible if you're forced.
yeah, but apparently He doesn't, because you can resist it. Okay, so that's a very clear verse on that. Okay, so the Spirit again convicts us, but we can resist it. Let's see here. Galatians, we looked at that one, and that was that the Spirit
Again.
wars or lusts against the flesh. And then Matthew 26, we looked at how the Spirit is willing to do right. Right? Okay, let's look at another one here. Judges 13:25. This is an interesting one. Judges 13:25. Spell that right? The D should go first. Yeah. Judges 13:25. So this is talking about Samson.
Mm-hmm.
Read that for us, please.
The Spirit of the Lord must be the Holy Spirit, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Old Testament. Began to move him at times in the camp of Dan between Sora and Esau, or Esau.
So what does the Spirit do there? Does it say that?
Convicting him.
Well, what's the word that's used?
Move him.
Move.
Moved. Now, I didn't read the complete context of this, but I have a vague memory that I think this is talking about Samson being moved to do something for the Lord, like fighting on behalf of God's people in those days. It was kind of today. How would you apply that to today? God really doesn't move on us to go kill Philistines today. So how would you? It's to do His will in some way, right? You could say maybe evangelism. That's kind of the
Yeah.
modern corollary. We don't fight with physical swords, we use spiritual swords today
Mm-hmm.
to slay Gentiles, meaning have them converted spiritually, right? We don't actually kill anyone. So Samson was moved by the Spirit. So the Spirit moves you, okay? 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 5. 1 Samuel 24, 5. This is kind of a basic topic, but I just wanted to really clarify this. 1 Samuel chapter 24 and verse 5. What's the Spirit doing here?
And it came to pass afterward that David's heart smote him, because he had cut off Saul's skirt.
Interesting, huh? What do you think about that?
So David's heart smote him.
Now, of course, this is, again, the Old Testament using some poetic descriptions. It uses the word heart, but we know the word heart means the mind. And so he has something he smote, his heart, his mind smote him? What is it? It struck him.
It broke him.
It's, yes, absolutely. Well, hello. Nice to see you. Please join us. So, again, this is the Spirit working on his mind. This isn't just his mind by itself. This is with divine impulse. And so the Spirit smote him. Or, it's just an Old Testament word for strike. To strike you, to hit you, right? And this is, again, conviction. Right? So the Spirit does that to us. When we do something wrong, your conscience pricks you, right? I shouldn't have done that, right? And so it continues to do that. Now these two here are kind of more pre-conversion, or people who never are going to be converted in this case. Conviction, kind of the initial conviction. But the conviction continues after you're converted, right? If you mess up, God will smite your mind to tell you, hey, you did something wrong. Prick your conscience. Okay, here's another one. Jeremiah chapter 20, verse 9. Jeremiah 20 and verse 9. Read that for us, please. And we are looking at the Spirit and the flesh and contrasting them. Jeremiah 20, verse 9.
Then I said, I will not make mention in him, nor speak any more in his name. But his word was in mine heart as a burning fire shut up in my bones. And I was weary and with forbearing, and I cannot stay.
Interesting. Very poetic language here, obviously. There wasn't a literal fire in his bones. But what is he saying here?
His word was in my heart. It's like a burning fire shut up in my bones. Man.
That's intense sounding, right? So
Up to the bones.
To the bones, right? Now, what did he try to do at the beginning of the verse? What does he say he's going to do?
I will not make mention of him.
So here's Jeremiah the prophet saying, I'm not going to talk about God anymore. I'm done talking about God. But his word,
It's burning.
is in me like a fire in my bones, and he says I was weary in holding it back. The Spirit's moving on him to speak, and he's fighting it, and he's getting weary of fighting this battle. He wants to let the Spirit speak through him. So how would you guys describe this? Again, what do you think? How would you describe this? What is the Spirit doing here?
Strong.
Spirit's strong? Absolutely. Absolutely. We usually think of the flesh as being this thing, I just can't overcome the flesh, it's so strong. But here we have the Spirit being described as
Strong.
Fire in my bones, and I was weary and holding it back. Absolutely. What else? How would you describe this? What's the Spirit doing? Well, it's like a fire in the bones. It's moving on him to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Moving you to speak or preach. Speak the truth. I don't know if you guys have ever had a situation like that where you just felt really convicted that you needed to say something, right?
Yeah.
Have anyone had a situation like that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess
You need
what?
to add something.
That was not your flesh.
It's
Convicted. If you're ever moved to speak the word of the Lord, it's probably not your flesh. That was probably the Spirit working on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the last one we'll look at on this side is Genesis 3:15. Could have made this the first one, but kind of a conclusion. Genesis 3:15. And we'll look at one more thing after that. So we read Genesis 3:15 for us, please.
And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel.
Okay. Now the focus there I wanted you guys to notice is the beginning of that verse.
Enmity.
I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. So God places inside us an enmity against sin,
Yes.
Satan, and his followers. Absolutely. Absolutely. God puts that in the heart. And that is why no matter how much of the world and its pleasures you have, you will never be fully happy if you don't have God, because God put inside you enmity against sin.
Amen.
There's another verse, I probably should have included this, but you guys have heard the verse that says God has put eternity in the hearts of men. You know, the idea is we want, there's a God-shaped desire, hole in all of us that only God can fill, and it's enmity against sin. Enmity. Did I spell that right?
No.
It's N first, right?
M-I-T-Y.
Enmity against
Sin.
sin. Okay. But again, we can resist this enmity against sin. Try and tell it to our conscience
It's
to
our choice.
be quiet, right? So again, this part, having a fallen nature, this is mandatory. Everyone is born with this. Every one of us. This part, parts of it are optional. The conviction, you're all going to be convicted. God's going to try and reach everyone, right? And the enmity is going to be there. But as far as letting God, the Spirit of God, actually come into you and control your heart and your mind,
It's your turn.
that's optional. You can resist it. This is mandatory. You're born with this. This is there from the time you're born, trying to get you to follow God, but you can ignore it. You know, and when I say born, I mean, we don't know exactly what goes on in the mind of a baby, right? But at some point, a child learns the difference between right and wrong. And the Spirit of God is doing some convicting and saying, hey, you should do this.
So there
And the
you
child either ignores it or follows it, but we have all ignored at some point and given into this side. Every single one of us. Go ahead.
So the baby, they don't know any better.
Yeah, yeah.
So who leads them to conviction?
Well, at some
That is
point,
right or wrong.
again, I don't know when when the mind of the baby kind of knows what's going on, but when it remembers or when it figures out the difference between right and wrong, the Spirit of God says, hey, this is right and this is wrong, and the child at that point can say which one they want to follow. We have all, every single one of us, followed this, but whether or not we followed it, it's still there. It's there regardless. You know, we're all born with this. Okay. And we all did follow it at some point. And it continues to plague us. So everyone inherits a fallen nature. And all have given in to this nature at some point and sinned, except Christ. Everyone inherits the flesh. And all are drawn by the Spirit. Everyone's convicted and drawn by the Spirit. That's John chapter 12, verse 32. He says, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men unto myself. So everyone has been drawn by the Spirit, but not everyone gives in to the convicting of the Spirit. And so your fallen nature is mandatory. Having the spiritual nature inside you is optional. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys an analogy, and we'll finish up. Now, I think this is a pretty good analogy in the Bible. Jacob and Esau. The birth of Jacob and Esau. So let's go to Genesis 25. It's an object lesson, it's an analogy. The Bible often uses men to describe types of people. Isaac and Ishmael are used by Paul in Galatians chapter 4 to describe those who are converted and those who aren't. Isaac, he says that we are of Isaac, the promised child, and Ishmael are those who are not converted. And so I think the same thing is done here in the, hello, please join us. The same thing is done here in the story of Jacob and Esau and their birth. So let's look at Genesis 25, verse 23 through 26. Somebody read that for us, please.
And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger.
Okay, now I'll stop you there. Notice it says not only are there 2 people, but 2 nations, 2 manner of people, 2 different types of people are symbolized by Jacob and Esau.
Mm-hmm.
Esau symbolizes what kind of people?
Is it the Gentiles?
The unbelievers, right?
The unbelievers.
Often throughout the Bible, Esau is given as the example of somebody who, I mean, you look at the story of Esau and he sold his birthright for
Yeah.
pottage. This is an object lesson for people who give up eternal life for nothing, for the things of the world. It says, don't be like Esau who did this and that, right? So Esau is a symbol of those who are of the world. Absolutely. And Jacob, well, his name was changed to
Israel.
Israel. And Israel is who? God's people.
God's people.
Jacob, God's people. Now, it's an object lesson. It's just a parable.
Yeah.
So don't take it too strictly. Jacob had his faults too, right? We know that. But he's an object lesson for those who are God's people because his name is the name of God's people, Israel. God's people. Now, the story goes on. Please continue. And I want you to notice something about the timing. Please, go ahead.
And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red, all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them.
Okay, so timing. Notice something here. Who was born first?
Esau.
Esau is the firstborn. Who was born second?
Jacob.
Jacob. Now, this is an object lesson for our lives if you are converted. You start out and you have a choice between the two, right? And who do we follow first?
The flesh.
We all chose to follow the flesh first. And that is like Esau. But we need to be born again. There needs to be a second birth.
And it's Jacob.
Israel, right? Jacob, right? So, we all choose the flesh first, but if we're converted, then afterwards we choose the Spirit. Is the first thing. Now, here's a verse that I want to show you that I think gives this principle. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 46. First Corinthians chapter 15, verse 46.
However, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, and afterward the spiritual.
You guys see that? Now, Paul is speaking about another thing, but it's a principle, I think, that applies here as well. We all first choose
Natural.
the natural, the flesh. We have all done that first. So we're born with flesh that pulls us towards sin, and the spirit that's convicting, saying don't do it, follow God. And we all first choose the flesh. So first, that which is natural. And after, that which
It's
is
the
spiritual.
spirit.
If you're converted, right? This part's optional. You don't
If
have
you
to.
chose.
You can reject this part, the spiritual side. So first, natural man. Afterwards, the spiritual. That's a principle, I think, throughout the Bible. To conclude, we'll go back because this is a study in Romans. We'll conclude by going back to our verse in Romans. Romans 5:18, and again I'm going to read this in the literal version, the Green's literal version, because the most other versions add in those extra phrases. But when understood properly, without those extra phrases added, we simply see that both are offered to everyone. And everyone has chosen this, but not everyone has chosen that. Romans chapter 5, verse 18, I'll read it to you guys. This is without the italics parts added.
5:18.
Romans 5:18. This is Green's literal version. So then, as through one offense it was toward, okay, we have the idea of an offer, toward all men to condemnation, so also by one accomplished righteousness toward all men to justification of life. So see, we have this idea of the offer of the flesh and the offer of the spirit toward all men. Everyone again has chosen this part and they followed their fallen nature, but not everyone has chosen this part. But the offer is given to both, to everyone. Okay? And go one chapter over, and our final verse is in Romans 6:16. We have the choice which one we are going to follow. Romans 6:16 says, know ye not that to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants you are, to whom you obey, whether of sin unto death, or of obedience unto righteousness. So the offer is given to all, and it's your choice who you are obey. And again, just to make it clear, this part is mandatory. Whether you obey God or not, this fallen nature is with you, and will stay with you until glorification, till we get a new body, but it's there. This part's optional. You can follow, have the spiritual nature and be partakers of the divine nature or not. But it's your choice which one you're going to obey. Any questions? Are we clear? I just wanted to make sure that we clarified that we indeed inherit a fallen nature, but you have a choice whether or not you're going to follow it, but everyone has followed it, unfortunately.
So Jesus came to earth to save every man.
Yes, he did. Absolutely.
All right. So if he saved every man, it doesn't mean that every man will choose him.
He
To
offered.
receive.
He offered.
He offered it, but it's your choice still to accept his free gift.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
most resist. Most resist.
So even from the Greek also in Romans,
Ah.
and having been set free from sin, you were enslaved to righteousness. And Jesus said that very clearly, right? You cannot serve two masters. You gotta choose one or the other.
One or the other.
Yeah, we cannot be a little bit enslaved to sin and enslaved, and then enslaved to righteousness.
Absolutely.
One or the other.
Very clear.
Yeah.
So it's
We'll go
yes
into-
or no.
We'll
No,
go
no.
into that chapter 6 next week. That's when chapter 6 and 7 are chapter 6, 7, 8 are my favorites. So these come back next week.
Good.
Let's say a prayer. Does anyone want to say a prayer for us to close? Please.